My name is Camille Nicholson, and 4 years ago, my husband told me I wasn't good enough, then walked out, took my kids, and replaced me like I was nothing. He thought I'd disappear quietly. Instead, I rebuilt my life and waited. Now, the man who humiliated me is on his knees, begging to see the very children he ripped away. This isn't just a story about loss. It's about taking back your power and making them face every consequence they thought they'd escaped. So settle in, because you're about to hear exactly how I made that happen. The air in the courtroom was cold enough to raise goosebumps, but I wasn't shivering. I'd been waiting for this day, this exact moment, for 4 long, relentless years. The mahogany table in front of me was spotless, yet my fingers traced invisible patterns into its surface, grounding myself, keeping my expression calm. Across the room, seated in the witness stand, was the man who once told me I wasn't good enough to be his wife, or a mother to our children. Now, he wouldn't even look at me. His jaw was tight, that smug confidence he wore like a custom suit nowhere to be found. His knuckles tapped against the wood as if the sound might save him from the silence stretching between us. But nothing could save him now. Not after what he did. Not after what I had planned. The judge's voice was a low hum in the background, procedural, detached. But my attention was locked on Nathan. My Nathan. The man who threw me away like last season's coat when my life took a turn. The man who paraded his new wife around Boston's high society as if she were a trophy. The man who kept my children from me as if I were some unfit stranger. And now, he was the one begging for access. 4 years earlier, the very idea would have been unthinkable. Back then, he held every card. The house, the money, the lawyers. Back then, I didn't have a plan. But pain is an excellent teacher, and in the years that followed, I learned not only how to survive without him, but how to dismantle the fortress he thought was impenetrable. I'd built this moment with surgical precision. The irony was delicious. He had no idea what was coming. He thought today was about a custody hearing. He thought I'd softened, that I'd be willing to work something out for the sake of the kids. He had no idea I'd been pulling threads behind the scenes, weaving them into a noose he'd willingly step into. My attorney, a quiet man with sharp instincts, slid a single piece of paper toward me under the table. A small nod. My cue. My heartbeat slowed, every nerve in my body tuning into the moment. Nathan was still speaking, something about wanting to make amends and be a family again for the children's sake. His voice had a rehearsed sincerity to it, like an actor reading lines he barely understood. 4 years ago, I might have crumbled hearing him talk like that. I might have believed him, but I'd seen what was behind those words. I'd lived the hell they were meant to disguise. I glanced to my right, where his wife, Marissa, sat stiff and silent. Her manicured hands were folded tightly in her lap, but her eyes betrayed her. They flickered between me and Nathan, restless, suspicious. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough to be afraid. I leaned forward slightly, just enough for my voice to carry when I spoke. Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to submit new evidence. The judge raised an eyebrow, and Nathan froze. The bailiff crossed the room, retrieving the sealed envelope from my attorney's hand. Inside was the culmination of months of quiet work, years of gathering what I needed while Nathan underestimated me. I didn't look at him as the bailiff delivered it, but I could feel the shift in the room, a low ripple of unease. Nathan's eyes finally met mine, and for the first time in years I saw it. Fear. I remembered the last time we'd stood this close, 4 years ago. He'd been leaning against the marble island in our kitchen, drink in hand, when he delivered the line that would echo in my head for months afterward. You're just not good enough, Camille. Not for me. Not for this life. He'd smiled as if he were doing me a kindness by saying it out loud. 2 weeks later, I was living out of my car. Now, here we were. Same man. Same arrogance. But I wasn't the same woman. The judge opened the envelope, scanning the first page. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, and he read further. Nathan shifted in his seat, glancing at Marissa again, who was starting to pale. My attorney stayed silent. We didn't need to speak. The evidence would do it for us. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. "Mr. Nicholson," the judge began slowly, "these are serious allegations." Nathan stammered. I'm not sure what—" "Save it," the judge interrupted. "We'll address this in chambers. For now, this hearing is adjourned until further notice." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a shot. Nathan's lawyer was on his feet immediately, leaning down to whisper in his ear. Marissa didn't move, her gaze fixed on me with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. I stood, collecting my bag with deliberate calm. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I walked toward the exit. I didn't rush. I wanted them to watch me leave. I wanted them to feel the unease growing in their chests, the questions clawing at their thoughts. At the door, I paused and glanced over my shoulder. Nathan was still staring at me, his mouth half open, as if he'd just realized the game he thought he was playing wasn't his anymore. I smiled, because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The evidence in that envelope was only the first cut. A small taste of the ruin I'd been engineering since the day he took my children from me. The rest would come piece by piece, each one sharper than the last, until he had nothing left to bargain with, nothing left to hide behind. And when the final blow came, it wouldn't just strip him of his access to the kids. It would dismantle the life he'd built in my absence, brick by brick, until the only thing he had left was the memory of the woman he said wasn't good enough. I stepped into the hallway, the heavy door swinging shut behind me. My attorney caught up quickly, his voice low. "He's rattled." "Good," I said without breaking stride. "That's exactly where I want him." Outside, the early spring air hit my face, cool and cleansing. Boston bustled around me, people rushing to work, cars honking in the distance, the hum of a city that didn't care about the personal wars being fought within its walls. I took a deep breath and let it anchor me. 4 years ago, I'd left this courthouse with nothing. Today, I was leaving with the upper hand. And by the time I was finished, Nathan would understand something he'd never believed possible. I had been more than good enough all along, and he was about to learn what happens when you underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. 4 years before that cold morning in the courthouse, my world felt stable. Or at least I convinced myself it was. On the surface, I had what most women in my circle would have envied. A handsome husband, 2 beautiful children, a brownstone in Back Bay with sunlight that poured through tall windows every morning. I played my role well, the polished wife of an ambitious Boston businessman. Our mornings had a rhythm. I'd wake before the kids, slipping into the kitchen while the city outside was still half asleep. The smell of fresh coffee would fill the air as I packed lunches and set out cereal bowls, all while Nathan scrolled through his phone at the counter. He never looked up much anymore, but I told myself it was just the demands of his job. His real estate firm was on the verge of a big expansion, he'd say, and I believed him. Once the kids, Olivia, 7, and Ethan, 5, stumbled in with bedhead and sleepy smiles, the air in the house softened. Breakfast was our time, our little bubble. Nathan would sometimes ruffle Ethan's hair or kiss the top of Olivia's head, but it was always rushed, half an afterthought before he grabbed his briefcase and headed out. I told myself he was doing it for us, that his long hours and distracted eyes were proof of his dedication. My days were full but predictable. School drop-offs, errands, a standing Thursday yoga class with my best friend Julia, volunteering at Olivia's school library. In the afternoons, I'd sit in the small cafe across from the park, sipping tea while I worked on freelance design projects. It wasn't the career I'd imagined when I graduated from RESD, but it was flexible, and it let me be there for the kids. Evenings were when Nathan and I were supposed to reconnect, but more often than not, dinner turned into a quiet affair. He'd answer work calls between bites or disappear into his office with a glass of scotch. I'd clean the kitchen alone, convincing myself that once the expansion settled, We'd go back to the way things were when we first married, when he'd surprise me with flowers or plan weekend trips on a whim. It's funny how you can live inside a life and not see its cracks until they've become chasms. Looking back, the signs were there. The way he'd avoid eye contact when I asked about his day. How his phone never left his side, even when he showered. The subtle changes in how he dressed. Sharper suits, cologne he'd never worn before. At the time, I chalked it up to him taking his career more seriously. We still had moments, though. Nights when he'd sit with me on the couch, arm draped over my shoulders, talking about the future. He'd say things like, "Once the expansion's done, maybe we'll get a place on the Cape," and I'd picture the kids running along the beach. It felt real enough to keep me anchored. Nathan wasn't always cold. He had a way of turning on the charm when it suited him. At dinner parties, at school fundraisers, even on random Tuesday mornings when he'd bring me coffee in bed. Those moments kept me believing in the man I'd married. They were breadcrumbs I followed, hoping they'd lead me back to the marriage I thought we had. The truth is, I was proud of the life we'd built. I'd grown up in a small apartment in Dorchester, the daughter of a single mom who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. The brownstone, the private school for the kids, the vacations, they all felt like proof that I'd made it, that I was living the kind of life my mother used to dream about for me. I held on tightly to that narrative, even when reality didn't quite match. And then there were the kids. My everything. I lived for their laughter echoing through the house, for the little notes Olivia would leave in my bag, for the way Ethan would sneak into our bed in the middle of the night and curl up beside me. No matter how distant Nathan felt, the kids kept me tethered. They were my reason to keep trying. Julia, my best friend since college, was the only one I ever confided in when the doubts crept in. Over chai lattes, I'd tell her how Nathan seemed far away lately, how I missed feeling like his priority. She'd give me that look, the one where her lips pressed into a thin line, but she never said the thing I think she wanted to. Instead, she'd just say, "You deserve to feel wanted, Camille." I'd nod, promise her I'd talk to him, and then go home and convince myself the timing wasn't right. There's one memory from that time that sticks with me, a small, almost forgettable moment that I now realize was the beginning of the end. It was a Saturday afternoon in late spring. We were hosting a backyard barbecue for some of Nathan's colleagues. The kids were playing tag with the neighbors, the grill was smoking, and the smell of charcoal and marinated chicken hung in the air. I was refilling the lemonade pitcher when I overheard Nathan talking to one of the younger associates, a tall man named Eric. "She's great with the kids," Nathan said, his voice casual. "But you know, not everyone's cut out for everything." Eric laughed like it was a joke, but Nathan didn't. I froze behind the kitchen counter, the condensation from the pitcher dripping onto my hand. I told myself I'd misheard. But when I looked out the window, Nathan was leaning back in his chair, that faint smirk on his lips, sipping his drink like he'd just made some clever remark. It was a small comment, one he probably thought I'd never hear, but it lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. At the time, I brushed it off, convincing myself he was just making small talk. Now, I know better. That was the first red flag waving in plain sight, the first crack in the facade that would eventually shatter everything. It happened on a Thursday, a completely ordinary, nothing special Thursday. The morning had started the same way it always did. Coffee brewing, kids rushing around to find their shoes, Nathan tapping at his phone between sips of espresso. He kissed Olivia on the head, gave Ethan a distracted buddy pat, and left with his usual, "Don't wait up, might be late." I didn't think much of it. Thursdays were my yoga days. Julia and I went to the same class we'd been going to for years, then grabbed lunch at the little Italian place around the corner. I remember laughing about something so trivial I can't even recall it now. It's strange how the last normal hours of your life never feel like they're leading up to anything. That evening, I was halfway through folding laundry when I heard the front door open. Nathan almost never came home that early. I called out, "You're home! Dinner will be—" But the sound of heavy footsteps cut me off. He came into the living room without taking off his coat. His face was unreadable, almost rehearsed. He didn't sit, didn't smile. "We need to talk," he said. Those 4 words have a way of rearranging the air in the room. I set the laundry basket down slowly. "Okay. What's going on?" He stayed standing, hands in his pockets like this was a business negotiation. "Camille, this isn't working." I blinked, trying to process. "What isn't?" "Us." He didn't even flinch. "The marriage. I've been thinking about it for a long time and you're just not good enough for the life I'm building." The words hit me so hard I physically leaned back. Not good enough? My mind scrambled for a reason. Something I could fix, something I could understand. "What are you talking about? We have 2 kids, a home." "I know," he said, cutting me off like my voice was background noise. "You're a great mom, but I need more than that. I need someone who can keep up with me socially, who understands the kind of circles I'm moving in now. You're comfortable here. I'm not." There was no hesitation, no remorse. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a verdict. "That's insane," I whispered, though my throat was closing. "We built this life together. Everything we have." "No, Camille." His tone sharpened. "Everything I have. I've carried the weight of this family while you've been doing your little projects and yoga classes. You've never understood what it takes to really get ahead. And I can't drag you along anymore. Drag me along." The man I had supported, believed in, raised children with, was speaking to me like I was dead weight. The room felt too small, my heartbeat too loud. "So what? You're just walking away?" He didn't answer. He pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and set it on the coffee table. "The papers are inside. My lawyer will handle the details." I stared at it, my hands trembling. "You already had papers drawn up, without even talking to me?" "I didn't want a scene," he said flatly. "It's better this way." I don't know how long I stood there after he left, listening to the sound of his car fade into the night. The kids were upstairs, blissfully unaware, and I was rooted to the floor with the realization that my marriage, my life, had just been gutted without warning. But that was only the beginning. 2 weeks later, I found out about her. Marissa. The perfect fit for his new life. Elegant, younger by a decade, with a corporate PR job that put her in all the right rooms. I saw the first photo of them together on a social media post from one of Nathan's colleagues. They were at a charity gala, his hand resting lightly on her waist, his smile warm and genuine. The same smile he used to give me. I confronted him the next day, my voice shaking with anger. "How long?" He didn't even pretend to be ashamed. "A few months before I left. But she's not why I ended things. You and I both know we were over long before that." "No, Nathan," I said, my voice cracking. "You decided we were over. You never gave me a chance. You wouldn't have made it in my world, Camille," he interrupted, almost bored. "Marissa gets it. She's the kind of woman who belongs beside me now." That was when I realized this wasn't some impulsive affair. It had been calculated. He'd been preparing his exit, lining up his replacement, making sure his life stayed perfectly intact, except for me. The custody battle was quick and brutal. He painted himself as the stable provider, the parent who could offer the children consistency and opportunity. I was framed as the sentimental, underemployed mother with no real career, no big home, no resources. His lawyers were relentless, picking apart every choice I'd made since the divorce papers were served. And he won. Just like that, my days went from waking up to Olivia's sleepy good morning hugs and Ethan's breakfast giggles to court-ordered visitation twice a month. I went from being their anchor to being a visitor in their lives. The grief was suffocating. I'd sit in the quiet of my apartment at night, staring at their empty rooms, clutching Ethan's old stuffed bear just to feel like I still had some piece of them. Every photo, every drawing they made for me became both a treasure and a knife in my chest. Nathan didn't make it easier. He kept the children busy on my weekends, arranging family outings with Marissa so the kids would associate their happiest moments with her. I heard them talk about her casually, how she helped Olivia with her homework, how she baked cookies with Ethan. It was a slow erosion, piece by piece, of the bond I'd fought to keep. And then came the final twist of the knife. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a formal letter from Nathan's lawyer. He was petitioning to reduce my visitation even further, claiming the transition was proving difficult for the kids. In reality, it was him making sure I had as little influence as possible. He'd taken my marriage, my home, my role as a mother, and now he wanted what little time I had left with them. I remember holding that letter in my hands, my nails digging into the paper until it tore. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Up until then, I'd been surviving, numb, going through the motions of a life I hadn't chosen. But as I stood there, the rage was no longer just grief's shadow. It was something sharper, more alive. Nathan thought I was finished, that I'd fade quietly into the background, grateful for scraps. He didn't realize that in taking everything from me, he'd given me something else. Clarity. I saw for the first time the man he really was. Not the charming husband I once loved, but a calculating, self-serving manipulator who saw people as accessories. And I knew that if I let him keep going, he would raise my children to think of me the way he thought of me, as not good enough. That could not happen. The desire for revenge didn't come as a sudden, fiery burst. It settled into me like a steady flame, quiet but unyielding. I didn't want to hurt him in a way that would fade with time. I wanted to dismantle the image he'd built. The perfect life, the perfect family, the perfect reputation. I wanted him to feel the same smallness, the same humiliation, the same helplessness he had engineered for me. And I wanted to do it so completely that he would never see it coming until it was too late to stop. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and pen. I wrote his name at the top of the page, and beneath it, a single sentence. Make him lose everything he thinks he can't live without. The letter from Nathan's lawyer sat on my counter for 3 days before I touched it again. Not because I was avoiding it, but because I was studying it. Every line, every phrase, was another confirmation of what I'd known deep down. This wasn't just about custody. It was about control. About erasing me from my own children's lives, one legal maneuver at a time. By the 4th night, I wasn't crying anymore. The grief had burned itself out, leaving only a quiet, unnervingly steady calm. I made myself tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet, but I knew one thing. Nathan had made a critical mistake. In his mind, I was harmless. Weak. The emotional one who wouldn't have the stomach to fight back. He'd always underestimated me, even when we were married. He mistook my patience for passivity, my loyalty for blindness. He'd think the same thing now. And that was exactly why he wouldn't see me coming. I began with the obvious. A quiet, methodical search into the world Nathan had built for himself since leaving me. Real estate deals, new business partnerships, charity board memberships, public photos with Marissa, always carefully curated, always smiling in the right lighting. I recognized the game. Perception was his currency, and his reputation was worth more to him than money in the bank. I knew then what my revenge had to target. Not just his finances, not just his custody claims, but the flawless image he'd worked so hard to project. Over the next few weeks, I played my role flawlessly. On the surface, I was the cooperative ex-wife. I smiled at pickups and drop-offs, made polite small talk with Marissa, never raised my voice. To Nathan, it must have looked like I was finally accepting reality, that I was moving on, settling into whatever smaller life he thought I deserved. Inside, I was taking notes. I watched how he handled the kids in public, how often he posted them online, how his social circle orbited around certain events, annual fundraisers, networking dinners, golf tournaments. I noticed the way his phone lit up during dinner, the way Marissa's eyes sometimes flickered when certain names appeared on the screen. Small cracks, tiny, almost invisible, but they were there. The real turning point came one Saturday when I stopped by to pick up the kids. Nathan wasn't home yet, but Marissa answered the door. She looked frazzled, hair slightly out of place, a wine glass on the counter, even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. The kids were in the living room, distracted with a movie. "Traffic?" I asked lightly. She gave a short laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Something like that. He's been busy." It wasn't just her tone. It was the way she said busy, a sharp edge hidden behind the word. I filed it away. That night, after the kids were asleep at my apartment, I lay in bed thinking about it. Nathan had always been careful with his secrets, but careful didn't mean perfect. If Marissa was already showing signs of strain, it meant there were fractures in that perfect life he'd built. And if I could find them, I could widen them until the whole thing collapsed. The idea didn't terrify me. It thrilled me. I thought back to all the times Nathan had spoken to me like I was an inconvenience. The way he'd sat in that courtroom, calm and smug, certain that the judge would see things his way. The way he'd said, "You're just not good enough," like it was a fact etched into stone. He believed that then. He believed it now. And he'd keep believing it right up until the moment I took everything from him. The decision wasn't made in a single flash of inspiration. It settled over me like a second skin. The more I thought about it, the more it felt inevitable, like the only logical conclusion to the story he'd started the day he walked out. For the first time in years, I felt in control. I started small. Every time we spoke, I let him think I was distracted, unfocused. I'd forget small details about pickup times, make light apologies, act like my life revolved around my freelance work and yoga classes again. I wanted him comfortable, unaware. At the same time, I began building a quiet network. Old acquaintances from our married life who still liked me. A former assistant from his office who'd left under tense circumstances. A real estate blogger in Boston I'd met at a charity auction years ago. I didn't ask for much. Just casual conversations, tidbits of information, stories about who Nathan was doing business with and where he was putting his money. Piece by piece, I was mapping his world. And the more I learned, the more I realized just how vulnerable he really was. His biggest deals relied heavily on investor trust. His name was tied to several high-profile projects with tight timelines. His personal brand, the one he'd worked so hard to polish, couldn't afford even a whisper of scandal. I didn't know yet exactly how I'd use it all, but I knew this. The seeds were already in the ground. And when the time came, they'd grow into something Nathan couldn't cut down without cutting himself to pieces in the process. One evening during a drop-off, Nathan lingered by my car. "You seem better," he said, like it was a compliment. "I'm glad you're moving on. It's healthier for everyone." I met his gaze, kept my expression soft. "I guess I just needed time." He smiled, satisfied, and walked away. What he didn't see was the way my hands gripped the steering wheel as I pulled away, not from tension, but from the effort of holding back a smile. Because I had already begun. And by the time he realized it, it would be far too late to stop me. Revenge, I learned, isn't built in a single strike. It's assembled like a puzzle, one small, deliberate piece at a time until the full picture is impossible to ignore. And for Nathan, the picture I intended to hand him would be one he could never unsee. The first piece was information. I started with what I knew. Nathan's business thrived on reputation and investor trust. One whisper of instability and the people who fed his empire would scatter. But whispers are useless unless they have teeth, so I began to dig. Late nights became my hunting ground. I combed through public records, property deeds, LLC filings, court documents. I set up Google alerts for Nathan's name, his firm, his key associates. It didn't take long to find the first crack, a stalled condo development in South Boston that had been quietly eating into his company's cash flow. The delays weren't public yet, but they were costly. I made a note. The second piece was relationships. I started reconnecting with people from our old life, the ones Nathan had brushed off as irrelevant once the divorce was final. Former colleagues' wives, old neighbors, that gallery owner we used to buy art from. I never pushed for information directly. I'd invite them for coffee, ask about their lives, and let them volunteer details about Nathan. Most didn't need much prompting. People love sharing what they know, especially when they think it's harmless gossip. One lunch with a former neighbor gave me more than I expected. She mentioned a contractor Nathan had been using for multiple projects. A man known for cutting corners and padding invoices. "Everyone knows he's trouble," she said, sipping her wine. "But your ex seems to think he's some kind of miracle worker." I smiled politely, but inside my pulse quickened. I didn't need to discredit Nathan myself. All I had to do was let him tie himself to the wrong people, then shine a light on it when the time was right. The third piece was watching Marissa. I kept our interactions pleasant, almost warm. She was easy to read, trying too hard to be liked, still unsure if she belonged in the role Nathan had carved out for her. Over time, I noticed something important. She was meticulous about appearances, but careless with details. She'd forget dates, double book events, leave receipts in shopping bags. Twice, I saw her texting furiously while Nathan was in another room, her body angled away just enough to suggest she didn't want him to see. I didn't jump to conclusions, but I logged every observation. By the third month of my quiet campaign, my dining table looked like a private investigator's office. Folders, photos, timelines, notes in my handwriting. Julia came over one night, saw the spread, and just stared. "This is a lot," she said carefully. "This is necessary," I replied without looking up. She hesitated. "You sure you want to go through with this? I mean, this is Nathan. He'll fight back." I finally met her eyes. "Good, let him. I'm counting on it." The stakes rose when I decided to follow Nathan's money. I didn't have access to his personal accounts anymore, but his business dealings left trails. A quiet conversation with a sympathetic contact at the bank where we'd once shared accounts led me to a financial analyst who owed that contact a favor. She couldn't give me everything, but she confirmed something I'd suspected. Nathan had been moving money between personal and business accounts in ways that, if framed correctly, would look suspicious to investors. One wrong headline and his carefully crafted image as a savvy, trustworthy businessman would fracture. It wasn't all smooth. There was the night I almost got caught in my own trap. I'd managed to get myself invited to a charity gala Nathan and Marissa were attending. Purely for observation, of course. I kept my distance, mingling with people I knew, occasionally glancing their way. But at one point, Nathan's eyes swept the room and landed on me. His brows lifted slightly, a flicker of something, suspicion, maybe, crossing his face. I forced a smile, lifted my champagne glass, and turned away before he could approach. That small encounter reminded me. I couldn't let my presence in his world feel intentional. If he started to suspect I was moving in parallel to him, he might start looking over his shoulder. And I needed him looking forward, confident, unaware. By the 6th month, my plan was taking shape. I had 4 key pillars. Expose the failing South Boston project at the exact moment Nathan was pitching a new investment deal. Leak credible rumors about his contractor's shady history to the right people in the business press. Use Marissa's own carelessness to create cracks in their public image, making it look like trouble in paradise. Trigger a custody review by demonstrating instability in Nathan's household, aiming to shift the balance back in my favor. Each piece on its own wouldn't destroy him. But together, they'd dismantle the foundation he stood on, leaving him scrambling to patch holes faster than he could fill them. I worked the timing like a chessboard. The South Boston leak had to land 2 weeks before his investor pitch. The contractor rumors needed to come from multiple, unconnected sources, making them impossible to trace back to me. Marissa's part would be trickier. I didn't want to outright fabricate anything, but I could ensure that certain unflattering truths reached the right ears. Then came the moment I knew the plan was almost ready. I was at the park with the kids when Nathan arrived for pickup. He was in a good mood. Too good. He'd just closed a deal, he said, and was heading to New York next week for something big. I smiled, congratulated him, and handed over the kids without a hint of malice. But later that night, scrolling through social media, I saw a tagged photo of Nathan at a private dinner in a high-end Boston club. Seated next to him was a well-known investor with a spotless reputation and a history of cutting ties the moment a whiff of scandal emerged. That was my signal. Everything I had, the documents, the contacts, the carefully planted observations, was pointing to a single truth. Nathan was about to step onto a stage with his reputation as his only armor, and I was holding the match that could set it ablaze. The last thing I added to my plan was a safeguard. If anything went wrong, if he somehow caught wind of my moves, I needed a fallback, something undeniable, irreversible. It came to me one night as I went through my folders. A series of photos Julia had helped me get from a friend in city planning. They showed unsafe construction on one of Nathan's projects, signed off by his miracle worker contractor. If those ever became public, the fallout wouldn't just be financial. It could be criminal. That was my insurance policy. One evening, sitting at my kitchen table with the folders spread before me, I realized there was nothing left to add. No more gaps, no unanswered questions. The pieces were all in place. I closed the last folder, exhaled slowly, and let the silence settle around me. The months of quiet observation, of playing the part of the harmless ex-wife, had brought me here. Nathan still believed he was untouchable. That belief was my final weapon. Because when I moved, it wouldn't be with noise or warning. It would be swift, surgical, and absolute. The plan wasn't just ready. It was perfect. When you've spent months building a plan like mine, the hardest part is knowing when to pull the first string. But once you do, there's no slowing the unravel. The first strike was quiet. I started with the South Boston condo project. Nathan's pride and joy, the one he was counting on to dazzle his investors in New York. I had already gathered documents showing months of construction delays, unpaid contractors, and safety violations buried deep in city records. All I had to do was make sure they landed in the right inboxes. One email from an anonymous concerned resident to a popular Boston real estate blogger did the trick. Within 48 hours, the story was live. Exclusive. Is the South Boston development dead in the water? It was careful. Just enough fact to be credible. Just enough speculation to rattle anyone with money in the game. Nathan didn't know it was me, of course. But I knew he saw it. His office must have been in chaos that day, scrambling to reassure investors that everything was under control. I didn't give him time to catch his breath. 2 days later, I moved to Pillar 2, the contractor. I leaked the man's history of fraud, unsafe work practices, and pending lawsuits to a different source, a business reporter who specialized in exposing shady deals. The headline was sharper this time. Boston contractor's checkered past. Why are developers still hiring him? The article didn't name Nathan directly, but the accompanying photo of the contractor standing on one of Nathan's work sites said enough. By the end of that week, the whispers had turned into conversations. His name was starting to circulate in the wrong way. Investors didn't like uncertainty, and Nathan's world was beginning to look uncertain. The third strike was more personal. Marissa had been careless again, this time leaving her phone unlocked on the counter during one of my drop-offs. I didn't snoop. I didn't have to. A single notification popped up from a man whose name I recognized from one of her girls' trips. The message was short but telling. Same time next week? I didn't want to fabricate anything, but I didn't need to. The truth was already messy enough. I didn't send the message to Nathan directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, I made sure a mutual acquaintance, someone who couldn't resist a bit of gossip, accidentally overheard me mentioning it to Julia in a crowded cafe. Within days, it had traveled through the same social circle Nathan depended on for validation. By the time it reached him, I knew he'd have already replayed every late-night meeting, every unexplained absence, every flicker of doubt about Marissa's loyalty. And the best part? He couldn't confront me about it without admitting he'd been told secondhand. The tension between them was visible the next time I saw them together. They arrived late to a school event for Olivia, their smiles forced, their voices tight. Marissa avoided looking at Nathan for most of the night, and when she did, it was with a flash of irritation. Strike 4 was the custody review. For months, I'd been documenting every inconsistency in the kids' schedule: missed handoffs, last-minute cancellations, late-night babysitters. I didn't bring it up with Nathan. Instead, I compiled it all into a clean, precise log and handed it to my lawyer. The motion for a custody modification landed on Nathan's doorstep the same week his investors started asking pointed questions about the South Boston project. He tried to dismiss it as vindictive, but the court didn't see it that way. Judges don't like instability, especially when children are involved. It was a war on two fronts now: his professional life cracking under public scrutiny, his personal life starting to splinter in court. But the final blow, that had to be perfect. I waited until I knew he was flying to New York for his investor pitch. The day before his presentation, I sent a neatly packaged envelope to the Boston Herald's investigative desk. Inside were the photos of unsafe construction on one of his projects. Beams not secured, wiring exposed, inspection reports signed by his miracle worker contractor. I'd had the images verified by a retired city inspector to ensure they were beyond dispute. The Herald didn't hesitate. The headline hit the morning of his pitch: "Safety violations could put developer in legal crosshairs." I could picture it: Nathan walking into that Manhattan boardroom, ready to charm millions out of people who thought they were backing a flawless empire, only to find the investors had already seen the front page. By the end of that week, two of his largest backers had paused their funding. The South Boston project stalled completely. His firm's name was no longer on the invite list for certain high society events. And Marissa? She moved out within a month. I wasn't there for their final argument, but I heard about it later. Voices raised so loud the neighbors could hear, accusations flying on both sides. Whatever was left of their perfect image crumbled that night. Nathan tried to fight the custody modification, but the timing couldn't have been worse for him. The judge reviewed the reports of instability, the public controversies, and granted me expanded custody. Olivia and Ethan started spending half their weeks with me again. The first night they stayed over under the new arrangement, I stood in the doorway of their room, watching them sleep. For the first time in years, the house felt full again. But the revenge wasn't just about getting them back. It was about watching Nathan lose the one thing he valued more than anything: control. That came 2 months later, when the city officially opened an investigation into his contractor, and by extension, Nathan's projects. The possibility of criminal charges was now on the table. Even if nothing stuck, the stain on his reputation would never fully wash out. The last time I saw him, he was waiting outside the courthouse after another hearing. He looked smaller somehow, thinner, paler, a man hollowed out by the weight of things slipping from his grasp. "Congratulations," he said bitterly. I tilted my head. "For what?" "You got what you wanted." I smiled, but it wasn't cruel. "No, Nathan, I got what you deserved." He didn't respond. He just turned away, his shoulders hunched, disappearing into the crowd. As I watched him go, I realized there was no more satisfaction to be had in chasing him. The plan had worked exactly as I'd intended, piece by piece, without him seeing the strings until they were wrapped around his neck. There was nothing left for him to bargain with now, and that was the final blow, leaving him not just beaten, but irrelevant. In the weeks after the court granted me shared custody, life began to take on a different rhythm. The mornings were louder again. Olivia singing off-key while brushing her hair, Ethan racing toy cars across the kitchen floor before breakfast. For the first time in years, my apartment felt alive, filled with the sounds I had fought so hard to reclaim. Nathan, on the other hand, was vanishing from the world we once shared. His face no longer appeared in society pages or real estate journals. The South Boston project was dead, investors had pulled their money, and the city's investigation into his contractor was bleeding him dry in legal fees. The friends who had once toasted him at rooftop bars stopped returning his calls. Marissa was gone entirely. I'd heard she'd moved in with someone new, a man whose last name opened more doors than Nathan's ever had. One Saturday, I ran into Julia at the farmer's market, and she couldn't stop grinning. "You did it," she said, handing me a bouquet of tulips. "You actually pulled it off." But I didn't feel like celebrating. Not yet. Revenge is satisfying, yes, but the true victory is in permanence. I needed to know this wasn't just a bad chapter for Nathan. I needed to know it was the whole book closing. That confirmation came one rainy afternoon when my lawyer called. "You'll want to sit down for this," he said. "The city's investigation has turned over some interesting documents. They're looking at potential fraud charges now. Misuse of investor funds." I stayed silent, letting the words sink in. Fraud charges meant court dates, public records, and the kind of stain no amount of PR could wash clean. "They're not just looking at the contractor anymore," my lawyer continued. "Nathan signed off on those transfers personally. If the DA pursues this, he could be facing real jail time." When I hung up, I realized I was smiling, not out of glee, but out of the quiet, steady knowledge that my work was done. Weeks passed. Nathan avoided me at school events, choosing instead to send his sister to pick up the kids. His posture was different now. No longer the man who once looked down at me, but someone bracing against the next blow. And then, just when I thought the story had reached its end, the twist arrived. It was a Friday evening. The kids were in their rooms, and I was sorting through mail when I saw the envelope. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Nathan's. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Camille, they're going to arrest me. I know you had a hand in this, and I'm not even angry anymore. I just want you to know." Marissa was the one who tipped the city off. She told them where to look. I think she wanted me gone before the wedding. "Thought you should know." I read it twice, then a third time, feeling a strange mix of emotions swirl in my chest. Marissa. All this time, I'd assumed every thread in Nathan's unraveling had been mine. But apparently, I wasn't the only one pulling. The realization was almost funny. He'd replaced me with someone who was just as capable of betrayal as he was. He'd traded loyalty for ambition, and in the end, it had cost him more than he could ever imagine. I folded the letter neatly and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't need to respond. Whatever the truth behind Marissa's tip-off, my plan had still worked. Nathan was finished, and nothing could change that. The next morning, I took the kids to the park. The air was crisp, the sun breaking through thin clouds, and for once I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder. Nathan's world had collapsed. Mine had rebuilt. And as I watched Olivia push Ethan on the swings, I realized the final, most satisfying part of my revenge wasn't seeing him lose. It was knowing I'd won. Thank you for watching my story until the very end. If it struck a chord with you, or if you've ever faced something even remotely similar, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Your stories matter here. Don't be shy. We have an amazing community that supports and uplifts each other. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the Velvet Revenge channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Every view, comment, and share helps keep these stories alive, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you.